Hawaii. This is Pokalai Nui, and we just heard the song of Haleiwa Hula. This is Hawaiian Potpourri. We are broadcasting from the top of the Chinese Cultural Plaza here in Honolulu, Hawaii. Today is the first day of September in the year 2012. We had been talking in the earlier hours about a number of issues: Iran, Israel, and the IAEA report with regards to Iran's nuclear or uranium ready for nuclear weapons or nuclear medical use. We've also talked about Citizens United and Barack Obama's suggestion that there should be a constitutional amendment if the Supreme Court does not overturn that decision. We also talked about the CIA torture case and how the Attorney General's office has decided to drop those cases, and the protest by a number of human rights organizations. We also talked about the Republican National Convention and how people were struck by the convention. Our callers have spoken about some of the hypocrisy that have occurred there and concerns that they had, whether or not it is truly one based on racial division, discrimination, or is it merely a story of every person having the opportunity to become successful in this type of society that the Republicans are imagining, or is that the whole story? There's also a discussion about Clint Eastwood and his appearance at the convention and what people thought about it. Not too much discussion on Condoleezza Rice and her speech to the convention. It was one of personal disclosure of herself. But you notice in the convention the presence of George Bush and the presence of the policies of George Bush, especially even when Condoleezza Rice appeared, and she being the former Secretary of State, did not talk about the wars in Afghanistan or the war in Iraq and the great times of the Bush administration, and all of that was left on the side. The story from the Democratic side is essentially the Republicans have essentially created such a condition that they have been losing the game during their period, and now wants the ball back because the Democratic administration has not been able to catch up and come even to what had occurred prior to the Republicans coming in. Well, that idea of having failed so miserably and putting the country in that state, the Republicans are now asking for the ball back so that they can continue with those, with their side of the game, not really wanting to expose what had happened in the early administration of George Bush. So that's part of the baggage that one carries whenever one brings some of the former administration, Republican administration, up before the national media. Our telephone number here is 524-1080, and if you would like to call and comment on any of these matters, give us a call, and we'll engage in a discussion based on your call. Okay, 524-1080. Let's go to our next caller. Aloha caller, welcome to the program.
Good evening.
Yes, good evening.
Yeah, as one of the previous callers mentioned, there is a tremendous amount of misinformation out there. Mm-hmm. And Thomas Jefferson said that democracy can only survive and thrive with a well-informed electorate. And there are so many lies and distortions. For instance, make a statement, half of the country not paying taxes. The next question should be, why is that so? Because they're not making enough money. They need a poverty level. Why is that so? They don't have the skills and the education. Why is that so? During the 8 years of the George Bush administration, funding to education have been cut. You see. Mm-hmm. Also, the national debt is now about $16 trillion. More than $10 trillion of that was put there by Reagan and George W. Bush. $5 trillion under George W. Bush, not including the stimulus funds that Obama got after he was sworn in. So the about $700 or $800 billion of the $1.2 billion that is the deficit this year, can be attributed to George W. Bush because there were two stimuluses, one when Bush was president and one when Obama was president. And why was that? To save the U.S. economy from total collapse. It was absolutely necessary. And so Obama gets blamed for $800 billion of the $1.2 billion trillion debt, but more than half of it was to save the nation from what George Bush did. Two unfunded wars, tax cuts during wartime. Never happened in the history of the United States. The nation went to war and had tax cuts at the same time. So the wars were funded by borrowing. So all this distortion and lies. And did you notice that Cheney, George W. Bush, Rick Perry, Kane, and all those, Carl was not present at the Republican convention? Why is that? Not to remind the people what they did to the U.S. economy.
Yes, yes, go ahead.
Also, people must realize that when you elect a president, it's possible that you are also electing a Supreme Court justice. We have a 5-4 conservative Supreme Court now that made it possible for people to give unlimited funds to campaign anonymously. As a consequence, the Romney campaign has a lot of money, and they are able to dish out all these lies and distortions. And if there is a lot of ignorance and information out there, they're going to fall for it. But you see, whenever anybody makes a statement, ask yourself some questions. Why is that so? Well, naturally, during the George Bush administration, the wealthy 2% of the American people gained more than 200% in their wealth. The average American middle-class person gained only about 4%. And the lower classes lost. And now they're asking the question, we want to give you a handout. You got to go out there and get a job. Where? Without their education. You are in a global economy competing with China, India, and the European nations. And only an educated workforce can compete. See, the point is that, remember now, more than $10 trillion of the $16 trillion debt was caused by Reagan and George W. Bush administrations.
Okay.
And these are all facts that can be checked out on the internet. All you got to do is go and look. But, I mean, it is so incredible. It never used to be this way. We used to have education funding, the GI Bill, that gave the United States the best educated workforce in the world. Social Security that gives the senior citizens a chance for a good life in retirement. All these lies and these distortions and the money, no thanks to the 5-4 conservative Supreme Court, may give Romney the presidency, and it's going to go back to the days of George W. Bush. See, we have to fix these problems, and to do that, you have to compromise. But the Republicans won't compromise. Even the Speaker of the House says he doesn't use the word compromise. Right? Compromise is a dirty word to the Speaker of the House. The U.S. Constitution was drafted and written under compromise. You know that, don't you? It was a compromise. They disagreed on many issues. They had to compromise. To solve problems, you have to compromise. You cannot base your solutions on ideology alone. This is a democracy. And if you cannot agree, then you have to give a little, take a little. Compromise. They are unwilling to do this. I'm telling you, things will get worse And I don't know what else I can say.
That's
it
assuming
is as
that
bad as it is.
assuming that the Republicans take the election. Yeah.
But there's a good chance they will because of the money they have to spend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the ignorance and the ill-informed American electorate. See, they are easily swayed by catchwords and phrases and distortions. Half the people not paying taxes. Well, certainly, you don't pay taxes if you don't have an income.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much for your call. Aloha. And if you would like to call and share an opinion, our telephone number is 524-1080. Let's go to our next caller. Aloha caller. Welcome to the program.
Okay, it's me calling again.
Yes.
I'd like to respond to something that I heard quite strongly in two previous callers, and especially the immediate one. He focused on something that I've been thinking about, and that is the right wing uses values, and that is tied to emotions. And they use the emotions of fear, fight, and yes, even love. But love of what? Is it money or values? What are their values? Now, the left uses facts and information. And therefore, when one begins to give facts to the right, the following in the right, their eyes glaze over because they do not deal in facts any longer. Because the right leaders don't want them to. Now, the right is based, dare I say it, on religion, and the left is based on science. And there's, as everyone knows, quite a conflict between those two. But I would like to address that and simply say, one is seeking the same thing. The other thinks it's found it. Now, that's the basic question, it seems to me, between those two. And I think if they talk to each other sensibly and discard the use of symbols on every level, then I think we can get someplace. Maybe.
Okay. You've discussed the two parties.
I have to turn the radio on.
Okay. You've discussed the two parties in the conversation, but the conversation is both aimed at a third party, its audience, who is the voters or the undecided voters, it appears. And I won't get into the topic of one side trying to quash the number of votes that will be cast through the different laws in the different states. But if you examine that listening party, the voters themselves, and I like this juxtaposing the religion as opposed to science, the emotional approach as opposed to the factual, informational approach. How does the third party, the audience, is persuaded? Or is that really the question that will be resolved at the election booth?
Polka?
Yes.
I think that how are the values?
How do you assess the audience?
Oh, yes. What does the audience do with this information? Well, see, that's very interesting. Now, how do you control the response of your market, your target?
Yes.
Through advertising, which takes a lot of money, and play on words, especially play on words, which can end up in distortions, deception, lying, and, throwing figures around that people can't follow, really. And I always think that numbers number brain. But at any rate, that's my input about that. And I think the idea that the right is using values as a weapon and the left is trying to use facts and information as a defense.
Okay. I like that that analysis. Thank you very much for your call.
Okay, Boga.
Take care. Aloha. So is it the case that the intelligence of the audience will determine the winner or the loser of the arguments, one from an emotional value-laden side, and the other from a more rational, methodical approach of the data or of the evidence. If you dumb down an audience and you have them only believe in these, what is the term I should use, the patriotic symbols, then you have one particular result. If you have an educated audience that, as you speak to that educated audience, they are able to take a look at the facts, you end up with a second result. What is the undecided voter? Where is that audience at? And is it appropriate to look only at that third sector, the undecided voter, the minority part of it, and be directing your questions there? What about the base of either the right or the left, the Republican or the Democrats? And are those bases so strong that they are immovable? Or are they only the leadership in those bases who are immovable, but the base itself can be convinced otherwise? So is the target only at that third audience, the undecided, and yet you're missing out at the spectrum within what is called the base, because the base itself may not be all that clear. For example, with regards to this idea of taxing the poor and not the rich, or this unfair system of taxation, or the elimination of Medicaid, Medicare, and the Social Security system, the destruction of the Social Security system as we are familiar with it. Is it truly the case that those who form the Republican base cannot be touched based on those arguments? Or are they able to move upon reflection and saying, we really need to give a fair shot at these questions and start reviewing the question again? Can they be moved? What about the question of internationally what has happened, and making the comparison between a Democratic administration and a Republican administration? Well, the Republicans are not saying anything with regards to the international management of affairs, especially when Mitt Romney went into foreign countries and did a very, very bad job of relating to these foreign countries. So all you have is what to compare against the Democratic record, at least over the last 3.5 years. Well, you move back to the George Bush record, and there you can make the comparison. Has the international management of affairs gotten better under the Obama administration as opposed to where it had been under the Bush administration? And I think that's another area that is being left untouched by the campaigns, by the Democratic campaign, and it should be something that is talked about. Now, the problem is that the expectations of Barack Obama, the expectations of the supporters of Barack Obama have not been met generally. And yet, when you look at the longer-term movement in international arena, you have to say that there has been indeed a change in direction. The direction that was being taken in the Republican administration of George Bush was probably that if he had maintained his presidency, the direction was war in Iran at the present time. And there was most likely a lot of interventions, whether it's in China or in North Korea or in other places. That's a trend between the Bush administration, the Reagan administration, the calling out of these other countries as being, the evil empire and other things like that. In the Obama administration, at least you saw a slow turning, but a turning of direction in the international arena. With regards to Iraq, the war has stopped. And with regards to Afghanistan, the war is decreasing, as essentially was promised by the Obama campaign. However, we are still disappointed by seeing that there is no appropriate going after the cases of the CIA's terrorism and torture against people who they have captured, or what is happening against American citizens by the Obama administration. You are finding that Guantanamo Bay is still open, still operating, notwithstanding the promises made by the Obama administration. So you have a halfway successful, halfway uncompleted or incomplete direction being taken by the Obama administration. But as you juxtapose it with the Republican administration, I think you would find a world of difference. So far, the campaigns have been looking more at the issue of domestic affairs rather than foreign affairs, and I think the next 4 years, the impact with regards to foreign affairs will have a tremendous influence on the domestic affairs, especially with what is happening in Europe and the economy in Europe and how the United States gets along with that, and especially as it regards China coming up, Brazil coming up, and other countries that we thought were, quote, third world countries. They are immediately stepping up and becoming essentially first world economies that is contesting the United States. Okay, our telephone number here is 524-1080.
Kaulana na pua o Hawaii, kupa ama hope o ka aina, iki mai ka elele o ka loko ino, pala pala anunu me ka paka. Pane mai Hawaii moku o ke ave, koku ana honoa o Pilani, ka ko'o mai kaua I o mano, pa'aku me ke one o ka kuhi hewa. Aolea e kau I ka pulima, maluna o ka pepa o ka enemi, ho'ohui ai nā ku ai hewa, I ka pono sivila a o ke kanaka. Aole makoa e mina, I ka pu'u kala o ke au puni, ua lava mako I ka pohaku, I ka ai ka maha